especially to the modern Czech Republic, occupy a unique space in the European imagination, often perceived as a mystical heartland where the veil between worlds feels thin. Prague, its ancient capital, stands as a particular focal point for these associations. A city whose very stones seem imbued with centuries of esoteric lore, alchemical secrets, and ghostly legends. This reputation persists, creating an aura of enchantment that draws scholars, artists, and seekers alike. The city's intricate architecture, labyrinthine streets, and dramatic history provide a compelling backdrop for narratives exploring magic, mysticism, and the occult. This report seeks to provide a comprehensive overview of the esoteric landscape of Bohemia and the Czech Republic. It begins by examining the cultural concept of osad, exploring its meaning in relation to fate and destiny within the Czech context. Subsequently, it delves into the historical trajectory of esoteric practices, tracing their roots from pre-Christian Slavic beliefs and folk magic through pivotal eras, such as the Renaissance alchemical flourishing under Emperor Rudolf Roman II, the complexities of the Baroque period, the cultural ferment of the National Revival, and the turbulent suppressions and revivals of the 20th century. Key figures, influential texts, defining movements, significant legends, and sacred sites associated with this esoteric heritage will be identified and analyzed. The investigation extends to the contemporary era, exploring the state of modern magic, paganism, and alternative spirituality in the Czech Republic following the societal shifts after 1989. Finally, the report synthesizes these findings, analyzing the intricate interplay between these esoteric undercurrents and the broader currents of mainstream Czech culture and history. The enduring nature of Bohemia's mystical reputation, even through periods marked by intense secularization efforts, such as the communist era, raises compelling questions. Despite high levels of contemporary irreligion, the allure of the esoteric persists, suggesting that these narratives may fulfill a significant cultural or psychological function. Perhaps they offer a connection to a deeper, pre-modern past, contribute to a unique sense of national identity distinct from larger neighbors, or provide alternative frameworks for understanding the world, particularly during times of political or social upheaval. This suggests that the esoteric is not merely a peripheral curiosity, but potentially a constitutive, resilient element woven into the fabric of Czech identity, capable of surviving suppression precisely because it resonates on a fundamental level. This report argues that the esoteric landscape of Bohemia and the Czech Republic represents a deeply embedded, continuously evolving, and often contested dimension of Czech cultural identity, reflecting and responding to broader historical, political, and spiritual currents from antiquity to the present day. 2. Osad, fate, destiny, and the Czech soul. At the heart of any exploration into Czech spirituality lies the concept encapsulated by the word osad. Direct translations render it as fate or destiny. Its cultural resonance is evident in its use as the title for works like Leos Janáček's opera Osad Destiny, suggesting a theme potent enough to inspire artistic exploration. However, understanding its deeper significance requires delving into the nuanced distinctions often drawn between fate and destiny in broader philosophical and spiritual discourse. Globally, fate from Latin fatum, that which has been spoken, is frequently associated with predetermined events, an unavoidable path, sometimes carrying negative connotations of powerlessness or misfortune. It can imply a fixed endpoint, though perhaps with some choice in the journey taken. Spiritually, fate might be seen as the outcome when one passively accepts circumstances or ignores a deeper calling. Destiny from Latin destinare, that which has been firmly established, while also implying a predetermined course, often incorporates an element of choice, agency, and potential. It suggests a path one is meant to follow, achievable through conscious effort, courage, and alignment with one's sole purpose. Destiny can be shaped, whereas fate might be seen as immutable. These concepts inevitably engage with questions of free will versus determinism, personal responsibility, and the nature of one's life path. The specific cultural weight or interpretation of osad within the Czech context remains somewhat elusive based on the available materials. While the term exists and is understood as fate-destiny, there appears to be no widely documented, uniquely Czech philosophical or spiritual elaboration readily accessible. This absence itself might be revealing. Czech history is marked by long periods of external domination: Habsburgs, Nazis, Soviets, and dramatic, often externally imposed, political shifts. Such experiences could foster a complex relationship with concepts of predetermination. Explicitly defining a national or personal destiny might feel fraught or even hubristic in the face of historical realities that often seem to negate agency. Alternatively, the pronounced secularization characterizing modern Czech society might push concepts like osad into the realm of private, individual belief rather than collective cultural definition. It is noteworthy that even in a highly non-religious society, a majority of Czechs report belief in spiritual concepts such as fate or miracles. This suggests facade might operate more as an internalized feeling or a way of grappling with life's uncertainties, perhaps a form of historical consciousness or even a quiet fatalism, rather than a formalized doctrine. Its meaning might be most profoundly expressed not through explicit definition, but implicitly through art, folklore, and individual attitudes towards life's unfolding events, connecting to broader spiritual ideas like divination, seeking knowledge of the future, or the sense of a personal journey, however defined. 3. Ancient echoes. Pre-Christian beliefs and folk magic traditions. The esoteric tapestry of Bohemia is woven with threads stretching back to antiquity. Grounded in the beliefs and practices of the early Slavic tribes who inhabited the region before the gradual arrival of Christianity between the 8th and 13th centuries. Reconstructing this pre-Christian religious world presents significant challenges, as the Slavs themselves did not leave direct written records of their beliefs prior to Christianization. Our understanding relies on interpretations of archaeological findings, accounts from non-Slavic, often Byzantine or Christian writers whose perspectives were inevitably colored by their own worldviews, comparative mythology with other Indo-European cultures, and the analysis of folk traditions where older elements often survived in altered forms. Based on these sources, pre-Christian Slavic religion appears to have been polytheistic. Although the exact structure of the pantheon and the extent of its uniformity across different tribes remain subjects of academic debate, a profound reverence for nature was central, with spiritual significance attributed to elements like trees, water sources, and animals. Procopius of Caesarea, a 6th century Byzantine historian, described the Slavs as believing in a supreme god, a maker of lightning likely identifiable with Perun, whose voice was heard in thunder, to whom cattle and other victims were sacrificed. Sacrifices, potentially including human offerings, particularly of captives taken in war, were made not only to the high god but also to rivers, nymphs Rusalki, and other spirits. Divination was often performed in conjunction with these sacrificial rites. The natural world was personified, with forces like the sun Desbog imagined as deities traversing the sky. Despite the eventual dominance of Christianity, many elements of these older beliefs proved remarkably resilient, persisting within folk culture and syncretic practices for centuries. This is particularly evident in the rich tapestry of Czech folk magic and seasonal rituals, many of which retain echoes of pre-Christian concerns about fertility, protection, and the cyclical nature of life and death. One of the most striking examples is Cherogenous burning of the witches, celebrated on the night of April 30th to May 1st, coinciding with Walpurgis Night in Germanic traditions. This festival is rooted in ancient beliefs about this night being a time of heightened supernatural power, when the veil between worlds thinned. Witches gathered for their Sabbaths, and evil forces were particularly active. To protect themselves and their communities, villagers traditionally lit large bonfires on hilltops, burned effigies representing witches or winter, and sometimes threw burning brooms into the air to reveal flying witches. The effigy often represented Morana or Morna, the Slavic goddess of winter, death, and witchcraft, whose destruction symbolized the end of the cold season and the welcoming of spring's vitality. Modern Cherogenous celebrations often retain the bonfires and effigy burning but transform the event into a community gathering with music, food, and festivities, demonstrating the tradition's adaptability. The symbolism remains potent, representing the banishing of winter and darkness, but interpretations can be complex, sometimes touching on gender dynamics and the symbolic destruction of female power, as highlighted by instances where communities have subversively created male effigies. Related to this is the specific ritual of drowning Morana, where young girls create an effigy of the winter goddess from straw and branches, parade it out of the village, and then burn it or throw it into flowing water, explicitly enacting the symbolic death of winter and the birth of spring. Other seasonal customs with pagan undertones include the erection of the Majka maple. Traditionally, unmarried men would fell a tall tree, strip its branches except for the top, which women, traditionally virgins, would decorate with ribbons and flowers. The pole, a potent symbol of spring and fertility, would be erected in the village center and guarded by the men against attempts by rival villages to cut it down, fostering community cohesion and rivalry. Even Easter celebrations in the Czech Republic incorporate distinct folk practices alongside Christian observances. The tradition of pomlázka involves boys ritually and gently whipping girls with braided willow switches, a practice believed to ensure health, youth, and fertility. In return, boys receive decorated eggs crassless, another symbol potent with life and renewal. Beyond these major festivals, folk belief encompass practices like searching for treasures on magically potent nights such as Cherogenous, requiring specific protective items like fern flowers or consecrated chalk. Divination practices persisted, such as attempting to foretell the future for the new year using methods like interpreting the patterns of molten lead dropped in water, floating walnut shell boats, or carrying carp scales for luck. Music and dance remained integral to folk life, serving not just as entertainment, but as expressions of cultural identity and community bonding. Modern echoes of these deep-rooted beliefs can be seen in the continued interest in animism, the belief in spirits inhabiting natural objects like plants and stones, and the practice of kitchen witchcraft, where everyday ingredients are used with magical intention and symbolism, often connecting practitioners to their heritage. The enduring presence and adaptation of these folk traditions, surviving centuries of Christian overlay and periods of intense secular pressure, underscore a persistent cultural connection to the rhythms of nature, agricultural cycles, and a worldview where the magical and mundane intertwine. They function as living repositories of cultural memory, fulfilling social needs for community and psychological needs for marking time and connecting with heritage, even as their original theological meanings may have shifted or faded. This deep layer of folk magic forms a crucial foundation for understanding the broader esoteric landscape of Bohemia. 4. The Alchemical Crucible. Prague under Emperor Rudolf II, late 16th, early 17th century. The reign of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II 1576-1006, 112 marks a pivotal era in the history of Bohemian esotericism, transforming Prague into a vibrant, internationally renowned center for the arts, sciences, and most significantly the occult. When Rudolf moved the Habsburg imperial court from Vienna to Prague in 1583, he initiated a period of remarkable cultural flourishing. Crucially, Prague under Rudolf offered a relatively tolerant environment for pursuits like alchemy and astrology, which faced persecution elsewhere in Europe. This tolerance, combined with the emperor's personal passions, attracted a constellation of brilliant, eccentric, and sometimes dubious figures to the city. Rudolf II himself was a complex figure, often described as melancholic, reclusive, and perhaps politically ineffectual, but possessing an insatiable curiosity and a profound dedication to patronage. He harbored a deep fascination with the occult sciences, alchemy, astrology, and magic were not mere diversions but subjects of intense, personal interest and investment. His primary obsession, fueled by both intellectual curiosity and perhaps the precarious state of imperial finances, was the quest for the legendary Philosopher's Stone. This mythical substance was believed to hold the key to transmuting base metals into gold, and perhaps more importantly, to concocting an elixir of life granting immortality and eternal youth. To this end, Rudolf established and funded large, dedicated laboratories within the precincts of Prague Castle, such as in the Michalka Tower, later known as the Powder Tower, where alchemists could pursue the great work, and where the emperor himself reportedly spent time conducting experiments. This imperial patronage attracted some of the most famous and infamous names associated with Renaissance esotericism. Foremost among these were the English duo, Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly. Dee, a respected mathematician, astronomer, and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, was a scholar steeped in Hermetic philosophy. Kelly, a more controversial figure, served as Dee's medium or scryer, claiming to communicate with angels, and later asserted he possessed the secret of transmutation. Both spent time at Rudolf's court, engaging in alchemical experiments and spiritual seances. Kelly, who resided for a time in the building now known as the Faust House on Charles Square, eventually fell from favor. Rudolf, convinced Kelly held the secret to gold but was withholding it, had him imprisoned. Kelly died following an escape attempt. He, after disagreements with Kelly, also left Prague. Rudolf's court, however, was not solely focused on the overtly magical. It represented a unique intersection where the boundaries between emerging science, established philosophy, art, and occult inquiry were fluid and permeable. The same emperor who funded Dee and Kelly also provided crucial support for the astronomers Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler. It was while working in Prague, using Brahe's meticulous observations under Rudolf's patronage, that Kepler formulated his revolutionary laws of planetary motion, a cornerstone of the scientific revolution. Rudolf's patronage extended to Mannerist artists like Giuseppe Arcimboldo, Bartholomew Spranger, and Hans von Auchen, whose works often contained complex allegories and symbolism. He amassed an unparalleled Kunstkammer, a cabinet of curiosities filled with natural wonders, scientific instruments, and artistic masterpieces, reflecting a desire to comprehend the totality of the cosmos. Furthermore, Rudolf engaged with the rich tradition of Jewish mysticism present in Prague's thriving Jewish community, which became the largest in the world under his tolerant rule. Court records confirm that Rudolf held private meetings with the community's chief rabbi, the renowned scholar Judah Loew ben Bezalel, famed for his wisdom and deep knowledge of the Kabbalah. This interaction aligns with Rudolf's known interest in Kabbalistic teachings and provides historical context for the enduring legend of Rabbi Lo creating the golem, an artificial protector animated through mystical means. The Jewish quarter itself became a center for alchemical activity, as it lacked the prohibitions found elsewhere in the city, leading Rudolf to allegedly construct secret tunnels connecting these labs to his own in the castle. The legacy of this alchemical era remains physically imprinted on Prague. Alchemical symbolism adorns numerous house facades, particularly along the royal route leading to the castle. Interpreting these requires understanding the stages of the alchemical process: negrito blackness, decomposition, the initial state; albedo whiteness, purification; citronitas yellowness, transmutation towards gold; and rubedo redness, perfection, the achievement of the stone. How signs like at the black sun Utranejo slunts unsell it, now streets symbolize negrito, the unworked base metal. Nearby at the white peacock U by Lejo Pava represents albedo, the stage of purification. On Neredova Street, signs like at the red eagle Utrvenijo Orla, at the golden key Uzil, Atajo Kleich, and at the little green deer Uzelanajo Jelinka, referencing a symbolic union, all point towards the final rubedo stage and the attainment of the goal. The house at the stone lamb UK Manejo Barenka and the iconic house at the Black Madonna Utrne Maki Boji are also frequently interpreted through an alchemical lens. The Black Madonna potentially symbolizing the prima materia or the negrito stage. Modern visitors can engage with this history through dedicated museums. The Museum of Alchemists and Magicians of Old Prague, located in Kelly's reputed residence, and the Speculum Alchemiae, which showcases a remarkably preserved medieval alchemical laboratory discovered beneath one of Prague's oldest buildings. The Rudolphine period thus stands as more than just a historical curiosity. It was a time when Prague served as a crucible for diverse intellectual and spiritual currents, where the quest for hidden knowledge fueled both mystical practices and pioneering scientific discovery. This era indelibly shaped Prague's identity, embedding esoteric symbolism into its architecture and cementing its reputation as a city where magic and mystery were not just folklore, but a tangible part of its history. The fact that patronage driven by the search for the Philosopher's Stone could simultaneously support the work that led to Kepler's laws highlights the unique intellectual climate of the time, where the lines we now draw between science, magic, and religion were significantly blurred. 5. Esotericism through the ages, evolution and transformation. The vibrant, concentrated esoteric activity of the Rudolphine era was a unique historical moment, but it did not mark the end of esoteric interests in the Bohemian lands. Instead, these currents continued to flow, adapting and transforming through subsequent historical periods. Influenced by shifting political landscapes, religious dominance, and evolving intellectual trends. 5.1 Renaissance Baroque currents post-Rudolf Roman II to mid-18th century. The period following Rudolf Roman II death in 1612 was marked by profound upheaval. Most notably the 30 Years' War 1618-1648, which began in Prague, and the subsequent consolidation of Habsburg power and the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Protestantism was suppressed, and Catholicism became the sole legal religion, profoundly shaping the cultural and spiritual landscape. The overt imperial patronage of diverse occult practices, characteristic of Rudolf's reign, inevitably diminished under these conditions. However, the intellectual seed sown earlier continued to bear fruit, albeit sometimes in less visible ways. The early 17th century saw the emergence across Europe of Rosicrucianism, heralded by anonymous manifestos like the Fama Fraternitatis 1614 and Confessio Fraternitatis 1615. These texts spoke of a secret brotherhood of sages and alchemists dedicated to a universal reformation based on ancient esoteric wisdom, blending Hermeticism, alchemy, Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism. While organized Rosicrucian lodges may not have been prominent in Bohemia during the Baroque period itself, the ideas certainly circulated within the European intellectual milieu. Intriguingly, some scholars connect the Rosicrucian Enlightenment project directly to the political ambitions surrounding Frederick V, the Elector Palatine, who briefly reigned as King of Bohemia, the Winter King at the outset of the 30 Years' War, suggesting Prague was seen, however fleetingly, as a potential center for this hope for transformation. The Rosicrucian emphasis on spiritual or symbolic alchemy, rather than purely operative gold-making, resonated with the more philosophical aspects of the Hermetic tradition that had found favor under Rudolf. Alchemy itself did not disappear. While perhaps less openly practiced or patronized, interest in its principles, both practical and philosophical, persisted. Alchemical symbolism continued to be understood and potentially incorporated into art and architecture, as seen in the ongoing interpretation of house signs and symbols like the Black Madonna. Pharmacies, sometimes evolving from alchemical workshops, continued operations, such as the one in the house at the Stone Lamb, known for its special remedies even into the 19th century. The dominant cultural force of the era was the Catholic Baroque, characterized by dramatic art and architecture designed to inspire piety and awe. While overtly religious, this period may have contained subtle esoteric dimensions. The Baroque fascination with intense spiritual experience, the interplay of light and shadow, the depiction of miracles, and the veneration of saints could be interpreted through mystical or even magical lenses. The cult of Saint John of Nepomuc, a martyr whose legend involves the seal of confession and whose veneration peaked during the Baroque, became deeply embedded in Czech culture, associated with specific sites like the Charles Bridge and beliefs in wish-granting. Architects like John Santini Eichel developed a unique Baroque Gothic style, blending contemporary dynamism with older Gothic forms and structures like the pilgrimage church of St. John of Nepomuc at Zelená Hora, a UNESCO site, suggesting a complex engagement with history and symbolism. The Emmaus Abbey, with its unique founding plan by Charles Roman IV, remarkable murals, influences, stands as another example of a religious site potentially rich in layered, perhaps esoteric meaning. However, the Baroque era also had its darker side regarding the supernatural. While perhaps less widespread than in some other parts of Europe, witch trials and the persecution of those accused of malevolent magic did occur, reflecting the anxieties and beliefs of the time. Torture was a recognized part of the legal process for extracting confessions. This stands in contrast to the more intellectually focused, often elite esoteric pursuits associated with the Rudolphine court. Overall, the post-Rudolphine Renaissance and Baroque periods saw a shift rather than an eradication of esoteric interests. While centralized patronage waned and Catholic orthodoxy became dominant, hermetic and alchemical ideas continued to circulate, folk magic persisted, and the intense spirituality and rich symbolism of the Baroque itself offered avenues for mystical interpretation and the embedding of legend into the landscape. Esotericism became less a feature of the imperial court and more a matter of individual study, symbolic interpretation, folk practice, and perhaps discrete continuation of traditions like alchemy, existing within or beneath the prevailing Catholic framework. 5.2 The National Revival. Late 18th-19th centuries. The Czech National Revival Národní obrazní, spanning roughly the late 18th and 19th centuries, was primarily a cultural and political movement focused on revitalizing the Czech language, literature, history, and national identity in the face of centuries of Germanization under Habsburg rule. While not overtly esoteric in its main goals, the revival's intellectual currents and cultural preoccupations created fertile ground for later esoteric developments and preserved elements relevant to the magical worldview. A key aspect of the revival was its deep engagement with folklore and the perceived authenticity of rural life. Scholars and writers turned to the countryside, believing it to be the repository of true Bohemian traditions, untouched by foreign urban influences. Figures like Karel Jaromír Urban meticulously collected and published Czech folk songs, nursery rhymes, and folk tales, akin to the work of the Brothers Grimm in Germany. This preservation effort inadvertently kept alive narratives and beliefs containing elements of folk magic, pre-Christian echoes, and supernatural encounters. The movement was also heavily influenced by European Romanticism. Romanticism, with its emphasis on emotion over pure reason, fascination with the past, especially the medieval, glorification of nature, celebration of the individual spirit, and interest in the mysterious and the sublime, resonated strongly with the revival's aims. The poetry of Karel Hynek Mácha, considered the greatest Czech romantic poet, exemplifies this spirit with its intense vision and linguistic mastery. This romantic sensibility, valuing intuition and the non-rational, fostered an atmosphere where interest in the mystical or spiritual dimensions of national identity could flourish. Some art historians even identify a characteristic Central European spirituality in the art of this period. Furthermore, the revival witnessed a profound desire to establish a deep, heroic history for the Czech nation. This yearning was so strong that it led to one of the most famous literary forgeries of the era, the manuscripts of Dever Králové and Zelená Hora, purportedly medieval epic poems discovered in 1817-1818 by Václav Hanka and others. They provided a narrative of ancient Czech glory, democratic traditions, and valiant defense against invaders. Though eventually proven to be 19th century creations, these manuscripts had an immense impact, shaping Czech mythology, providing inspiration for artists and composers, and fueling nationalist sentiment for decades. The success of these forgeries highlights a cultural willingness to embrace a romanticized, potent, and perhaps mythical past, a sentiment often mirrored in esoteric traditions seeking ancient wisdom. Towards the end of the 19th century, as the revival matured and Czech society underwent industrialization and social change, new intellectual currents emerged. The fin de siècle atmosphere across Europe saw challenges to positivism and rationality, with movements like symbolism and decadence finding expression in Czech literature through figures associated with the journal Moderní Review. This period also marked the arrival of organized modern Western esoteric movements into the Czech lands. Theosophy, the influential spiritual movement founded by Helena Blavatsky, and Martinism, a form of esoteric Christianity, were introduced around 1891, notably through the efforts of Baron Adolf Ranselian Hardy, a nobleman active in international occult circles. This signifies a shift from drawing inspiration primarily from native folklore and romanticized history towards engaging with structured, international esoteric systems. In essence, the national revival, while focused on language, culture, and nationhood, played a paradoxical role in the history of Czech esotericism. Its dedication to folklore preserved elements of magical belief. Its romantic spirit valued the non-rational and the mystique of the past. The intense desire for a foundational national myth, even leading to forgery, demonstrated a cultural receptivity to powerful origin stories. These factors, combined with the broader European intellectual shifts at the century's end, created an environment where modern occult and esoteric movements could find purchase and begin to establish a foothold within the distinct Czech intellectual sphere that the revival itself had painstakingly constructed. This period reveals how the search for national identity and the pursuit of esoteric or spiritual knowledge could become intertwined, drawing on similar desires for authenticity, ancient roots, and alternative narratives to dominant political or cultural paradigms. 5.3 The 20th Century, Golden Age, Suppression, and Resilience. The 20th century subjected Czech esoteric traditions to dramatic oscillations between periods of unprecedented openness and flourishing, followed by brutal suppression under totalitarian regimes, only to demonstrate remarkable resilience and revival. The establishment of the First Czechoslovak Republic 1918-1938 ushered in what some researchers term the Golden Age of Czech Hermeticism. The newfound national independence and democratic atmosphere fostered a climate where esoteric and occult societies could organize and operate openly, attracting significant interest. Several key organizations emerged during this period. Universalia, Society of Czechoslovak Hermeticists, founded initially as a study circle in 1920 and formally established in 1930. Universalia became the most prominent Czech occult society, boasting around 700 members nationwide by 1938. Led for much of its existence by the influential Dr. John Keffer, it brought together leading Hermeticists, published esoteric literature and study materials, and organized lectures. Its membership included figures who would become central to Czech esotericism for decades. Psyche, founded in 1929 by the mystic and writer Karel Weinfurter. This society focused specifically on mysticism and published a journal of the same name, operating until 1941. Horov Club, established in 1937 by Petr Kohout, also known by his esoteric name Pierre de Lesnik, after he resigned from Universalia. This Prague-based group concentrated on Martinism and the esoteric traditions of ancient Egypt, emphasizing a practical, active approach. Lesnik also founded a Martinist lodge, Paragava, in Paris. Other groups, Theosophical and Martinist lodges, some tracing their lineage back to Baron Hardy's late 19th century initiatives, continued to exist, alongside the Free School of Hermetic Sciences founded earlier by Ottokar Gries. This era was defined by several influential figures whose work shaped the Czech esoteric milieu. Dr. John Keffer 1906-1941, a polymath, librarian, translator, astrologer, magician, and accomplished musician, Keffer was the dynamic chairman of Universalia. He translated key esoteric texts like those of Eliphas Levi, and was considered one of the leading occultists of the First Republic. Petr Kohout Pierre de Lesnik 1900-1944, a key figure in Universalia before founding the Horov Club. Lesnik was deeply involved in Martinism and Egyptian esotericism. Karel Weinfurter 1867-1942, founder of the Psyche Society and Journal. Weinfurter was a prolific writer on mysticism and practical spiritual paths. František Block 19, 102-19, 169, a prominent member of Universalia. Notable for being one of the few leading figures from this era to survive the subsequent persecutions. Oldrich Elias D. WW2, another significant member of Universalia who perished during the Nazi occupation. Miloš Meixer 1873-19, 137, an important early translator of French occult texts, e.g. Papist and promoter of Max Theon's cosmic philosophy. Though his later life saw involvement with Czech fascist movements, this golden age came to an abrupt and brutal end with the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia in March 1939. The Nazi regime, despite harboring its own internal interests in the occult, particularly within Himmler's SS, systematically targeted Czech esoteric organizations, deeming them dangerous to the German Reich. Societies like Universalia and Psyche had their activities severely restricted and were ultimately dissolved in 1941. A concerted effort was made to eradicate esoteric literature through confiscation from private collections and removal from public libraries. Key figures faced persecution. John Keffer and Oldrich Elias were arrested and died in Nazi concentration camps. Keffer in Flossenburg. Karl Weinfurter died in 1942 as a result of German imprisonment. Peter Kohout-Lesnik died of natural causes during the war but had ceased public activities. A particularly striking episode from this dark period involves John Keffer's alleged attempts to use ritual magic to assassinate Adolf Hitler in 1938 and potentially later. According to historical accounts and legends, Keffer, driven by patriotism, even approached President Edvard Beneš to offer these magical services, though Beneš ultimately relied on conventional means. Legend holds that the rituals failed, possibly due to a break in the magical circle, and that Keffer was warned he would pay with his life for his efforts. His later arrest by the Gestapo, reportedly after refusing an offer to become Hitler's astrologer and being denounced by another occultist, and death in Flossenburg lend a tragic resonance to the tale. This story dramatically illustrates the intersection of esoteric beliefs with national crisis and resistance against tyranny. Following World War II, there was no significant public revival of the pre-war esoteric societies like Universalia. The establishment of the communist regime in 1948 brought a new wave of suppression, this time targeting all forms of religion and spirituality in favor of state-sponsored scientific atheism. While the regime's primary focus was on dismantling the power of the established Christian churches, especially Catholicism, the pervasive atmosphere of hostility towards any non-materialist worldview meant that esoteric and occult practices could only survive, if at all, in deep secrecy and privacy. Czechoslovakia became one of the most secularized countries in the Eastern Bloc, a stark contrast to neighboring Poland, where Catholicism remained a powerful force of national identity. The Velvet Revolution of 1989, which ended communist rule, opened the floodgates for spiritual exploration. Decades of enforced atheism were followed by a surge of interest in religion and alternative spiritualities. This created the space for the re-emergence of dormant traditions and the introduction of new esoteric, occult, and pagan movements, which will be explored in Section 7. Notably, the legacy of the First Republic's Golden Age was not entirely lost. Universalia itself was reportedly revived in the 1990s. The 20th century trajectory of Czech esotericism thus mirrors the nation's broader political narrative. A period of vibrant intellectual freedom during the First Republic, followed by devastating suppression under two successive totalitarian regimes, and finally, a resurgence fueled by newfound liberty. The fact that these traditions were targeted so systematically suggests that authorities perceived them, despite their often small size, as potential sources of independent thought and countercultural identity. The survival underground and rapid reappearance after 1989 testify to the deep roots and persistent appeal of esoteric and alternative spiritual frameworks within Czech society. Table 1. Key 20th century Czech esoteric figures. Societies. Figure. Society name. Lifespan. Active years. Key affiliations. Type. Focus. Notable activities. Fate. Notes. Baron Adolf Franzlian, Hardy 1856-1900, 8 Theosophy. Martinism introduced Theosophy and Martinism to Czech lands. 1891 founded lodges. Kickstarted modern Czech occultism. Ottokar, Greece, active early 20th. C. Martinism. Papist connection. Founded Free School of Hermetic Sciences 1905. Astrology, magic, hermetic medicine. Spagyria, published journal Isis. Influential teacher and publisher. Miloš Mixer 1873-1937 Martinism, Theosophy, Psychical Res. Translator Pappus, promoter of cosmic philosophy, networker. Later involved with Czech fascist movement Vlajka. Universalia, founded 1920-1930, dissolved 1941 Hermetic Society, major Czech occult society, tilde 700 members, lectures, publishing, led by Keffer. Suppressed by Nazis, revived 1990s. Dr. John Keffer 1906-1941 Universalia chairman, Hermeticism astrologer, magician, translator Levi, author. Allegedly attempted magical attacks on Hitler. Died in Flossenburg concentration camp. Karl Weinfurter 1867-1942 Theosophy, Universalia, Psyche, founded Psyche Society Journal, 1929, writer on mysticism. Died 1942 as result of German imprisonment. Psyche Society, founded 1929, dissolved 1941. Mysticism, focused on mysticism, published journal Psyche. Founded by Weinfurter, suppressed by Nazis. Peter Kohout Pierre de Lesnick 1900-1944 Universalia, Horov Club, Martinism, focused on Martinism, Egyptian, esotericism. Founded Horov Club 1937 Paragava Lodge, Paris. Resigned from Universalia. Died of natural causes during WW2 after limiting activities. Horov Club, founded 1937 Martinism, Egyptian esotericism, focused on personal active approach to Martinism and Egyptian themes. Founded by Lesnick after leaving Universalia, activity restricted under Nazis. Ulrich Ilyash WW2 Universalia, prominent member of Universalia. Died in Nazi concentration camp. František Block 1900-1969 Universalia, significant member of Universalia. Survived WW2, continued esoteric work privately. 6. Myths, legends, and sacred geography, the esoteric reputation of Bohemia and Prague in particular, is deeply interwoven with a rich tapestry of myths, legends, and a sense of sacred geography. These narratives, often attached to specific locations, do more than simply entertain. They contribute significantly to the city's unique atmosphere, genius loci, shape cultural identity by providing foundational stories and heroic figures, and blur the lines between historical fact and imaginative interpretation. Several legends stand out for their enduring popularity and connection to key, esoteric themes or historical periods. The Golem of Prague, perhaps the most internationally famous Prague legend. It tells of Rabbi Judah Loew ben Basil the Maharal, the 16th century chief rabbi and scholar of Jewish mysticism Kabbalah, creating a giant protector from the clay of the Vltava River, animated by placing the Hebrew word emet, truth, on its forehead or in its mouth. The golem defended the Jewish ghetto against pogroms but eventually grew uncontrollably violent. Rabbi Loew deactivated it by removing the first letter, changing emet to met, death. This legend powerfully connects the historical figure of Rabbi Loew, Emperor Rudolf Roman, to interests in Kabbalah, and the mystical potential believed inherent in sacred language and ritual. The golem remains a potent symbol of Prague's Jewish heritage and its mystical undercurrents. Princess Libusz. The legendary founder of Prague, Libusz embodies the archetype of the seer and wise ruler, prophetess who governed the Czech tribes. She famously foresaw the future glory of Prague, a city whose fame would touch the stars from her seat at Vyšehrad, directing her people to find a man carving a threshold Pra in Czech, giving Prague its name. Her marriage to Przemysl the Plowman established the first Czech dynasty. Libusz represents the foundational connection between the land, prophetic vision, and the destiny Assad of the nation. Horomir and Shemek. This tale celebrates loyalty and miraculous intervention. Horomir, a farmer unjustly sentenced to death, is saved by his faithful white horse Shemek, who makes an impossible leap from the cliffs of Vyšehrad fortress across the Vltava River. Shemek dies from the effort but requests a proper tomb, and legend holds the horse sleeps within the Vyšehrad rock, ready to aid the Czech nation in times of need. Dalibor of Kozlogy, imprisoned in the tower at Prague Castle that now bears his name, Daliborka. This knight is said to have learned to play the violin while incarcerated, captivating the citizens of Prague with his mournful music until his execution. The legend speaks to the power of art, even in captivity, and adds a layer of tragic romance to the castle's history. Runkvik. This knightly legend involves adventure, a loyal lion companion whose image, often with two tails, is linked to the Czech coat of arms, and a magic sword hidden within a pillar of the Charles Bridge. The sword is prophesied to be wielded by Saint Wenceslas when he rises from his slumber within Blanik Mountain to save the Czech lands in their darkest hour. This connects the bridge directly to national salvation myths. Guido the Magician, a figure associated with the court of King Wenceslas Roman IV, Guido is remembered for his magical feats and trickery, such as turning straw into pigs that revert when touched by water. He represents the archetype of the court magician, blurring entertainment and supernatural power. The White Lady Belapani, often identified as Perchtav Rajberg. This ghostly figure is said to haunt various castles associated with the powerful Rajberg family, e.g. Český Krumlov Rajberg nad Vltavou, acting as a guardian spirit whose appearances portend significant events. Beyond these major figures, Prague and Bohemia teem with other localized legends, tales of headless spirits like the Templar or Laura. The naming of the Smíchov district, the cursed treasure of the silver fish. The story of the thief whose hand was grabbed by the statue of the Virgin Mary in St. James Church. Rumors of pagan sacrifices on Petrin Hill, monastery ghosts at Imazi, the tragic romance in the house at death. And even speculation about a vampire princess Eleanor von Schwarzenberg buried in Český Krumlov. These legends are intrinsically linked to specific locations, creating a sacred or mysterious geography. Prague Castle, as the historical seat of power, it is naturally a focal point for legends. Housing Rudolf Roman II alchemical labs, Daliborka Tower, the St. Vitus Cathedral repository of the allegedly cursed Bohemian crown jewels, and sites associated with various rulers and events. Charles Bridge, its construction allegedly involved numerology and astrology. It is the setting for Brunswick's sword legend, the site where St. John of Nepomuk was martyred, and features numerous statues with their own stories. Vyšehrad, the mythical Acropolis associated with Libyush and the resting place of Shemek, embodying the nation's legendary origins. The Jewish quarter Joseph, inextricably linked with Rabbi Lo and the Golem, and historically a center for alchemical laboratories. The Old New Synagogue is a key landmark. Specific houses, buildings like the Faust House associated with Kelly and magic, the house at the Black Madonna alchemical symbolism, and the house at the Stone Lamb alchemical carvings serve as tangible anchors for esoteric narratives. Religious sites, churches and monasteries often accumulate legends, such as St. James Church, Emmaus Abbey, the Prague Loreto, and even churches outside Prague like St. Barbara's in Kut, Nahor noted for demonic art. Other locations, cemeteries like Olszany, public squares featuring Baroque plague columns commemorating deliverance from epidemics. The new town hall with its enigmatic palindrome, the hidden Rudolphine tunnel beneath Letna Park, carvings of the Green Man on buildings, and even modern constructions like neo-pagan stone circles Hijab near Piels, and Dražičky Spoli contribute to this layered landscape. This dense concentration of place-based legends effectively creates a psychogeography of Prague and its surroundings. Historical events, folk beliefs, and esoteric interpretations become fused to the physical environment. This narrative overlay actively constructs and reinforces the perception of Bohemia as a land steeped in magic and mystery, serving as a powerful vessel for cultural memory, reflecting collective hopes, fears, and interpretations of the past embedded within the very fabric of the city. The frequent blending of legendary accounts with documented historical figures further complicates the boundary between myth and history, adding to the region's enigmatic allure. 7. Contemporary Czech esotericism, modern magic, spirituality, and paganism post-1989. The fall of the communist regime in 1989 marked a profound shift in the spiritual landscape of the Czech Republic. Decades of state-enforced atheism and suppression of religious institutions gave way to newfound freedoms of belief and practice. This resulted in a complex and somewhat paradoxical situation. While census data consistently show the Czech Republic to be one of the most secularized nations in Europe, with high percentages of citizens declaring no religious affiliation, this exists alongside a significant and diverse interest in alternative spiritualities, modern paganism, and various forms of occultism and magic. The immediate post-revolutionary years saw a notable surge of interest in various spiritual paths, both traditional and non-traditional, as people explored belief systems previously forbidden or inaccessible. Many Czechs identify as spiritual, but not religious, embracing institutionally unbound forms of belief. Modern paganism, contemporary paganism, neopaganism, emerging from the shadows or newly formed after 1989. Contemporary paganism in the Czech Republic encompasses a variety of paths and traditions. While precise numbers are difficult to ascertain due to the often non-institutional nature of these beliefs and limitations in census categories until recently, estimates suggest a community numbering perhaps between 1,000 and 2,000 active adherents, with potentially many more sympathizers or individuals incorporating pagan elements into their personal spirituality. The Czech pagan scene includes Slavic native faith Rodnovery groups seeking to reconstruct or revive the pre-Christian religious practices of the Slavic peoples. Organizations like Rodnovery are active in this sphere. Germanic Norse Reconstructionism Heathenria Satru, focusing on the traditions of Germanic and Norse paganism. Research suggests this is a relatively popular path among Czech pagans. The Brotherhood of Wolves Bratist, VOVLQ, is one group associated with this current, though potentially evolving towards primitivism. Celtic Reconstructionism Druidry, inspired by the beliefs and practices of the ancient Celts. Who historically inhabited Bohemia, the Boii tribe giving Bohemia its name. While interest in Celtophilia was notable, especially in the late 20th century. Specifically, Reconstructionist Celtic paganism appears to be a smaller segment compared to Slavic or Germanic paths, often blending with more eclectic approaches. Groups focused on Celtic culture and reenactment, like Boii.C or Bratist, Vokeltu, exist, sometimes overlapping with pagan interests. Wicca and witchcraft, influenced by international Wiccan traditions, for example works by Gerald Gardner, Raymond Buckland, Scott Cunningham, becoming available, and other forms of modern witchcraft. These often overlap with eclectic or individualistic approaches. Shamanism and eclecticism, paths drawing inspiration from shamanic practices worldwide or blending elements from multiple traditions, including individualistic or New Age adjacent spirituality. Surveys suggest a significant portion of Czech pagans identify with eclectic or individual paths. Several organizations work to support and connect the diverse pagan community. The Pagan Federation International PFI has a Czech branch, PFIX, which organizes events like pubmoots and formal gatherings, lectures, excursions, pagan footsteps project visiting significant sites, and participates in larger festivals. The Česká pohenská společnost Czech Pagan Society is another key civic association aiming to support paganism, foster community, and provide information. It also engages in activities like organizing field trips, publishing an online magazine Kolovrat, and fostering creative expression Bard, Ska Gilda. Common themes within Czech paganism include reverence for nature, polytheism, belief in multiple deities, animism, belief in spirits inhabiting nature, and a focus on ritual practice. There is a spectrum ranging from strict Reconstructionism attempting to accurately revive historical religions to more eclectic or revivalist approaches that adapt ancient inspirations for modern life. Archaeological sites, ancient hill forts, burial mounds, and newly constructed sacred spaces like stone circles are often used as locations for rituals, connecting contemporary practice with the historical landscape. Some studies suggest that Central and Eastern European paganism may exhibit stronger nationalist or right-wing political tendencies compared to the more typically left-leaning or green-aligned paganism in Western Europe. Although mainstream organizations often explicitly reject racism and intolerance, modern occultism and magic, alongside paganism, the post-1989 era allowed for the open practice and study of various occult and magical traditions. Academic conferences focusing on esotericism and occultism are now held in the Czech Republic, indicating a level of scholarly interest alongside practitioner activity. One visible contemporary interpretation is presented by Veronika Varlow through her book and teachings marketed as Bohemian Magic. She describes this as a lineage-based practice drawing on Czech Romani witchcraft traditions passed down from her grandmother, infused with a modern rock and roll aesthetic and personal sorcery school of spectaculus. Her approach emphasizes spells and rituals for personal empowerment, self-love, confidence, manifesting desires, and connecting with ancestors. While drawing on Bohemian heritage, it represents a highly personalized, internationally marketed form of modern magic. Beyond this specific example, the contemporary scene likely includes a wide array of individual practitioners and small, informal groups exploring diverse paths such as ceremonial magic, divination, Hermeticism, chaos magic, the lemma, and other currents within Western esotericism. The Internet undoubtedly plays a significant role in connecting individuals and disseminating information within these often less visible communities. The revival of historical societies like Universalia in the 1990s also points to a continued interest in the more structured Hermetic traditions of the First Republic. Broader spirituality trends. The Czech Republic's spiritual landscape is further diversified by the presence of other non-traditional movements that gained footholds after 1989, such as the Hare Krishna movement, ISKCON, Buddhism, and Hinduism, alongside the significant number of people identifying with a personal, non-institutional spirituality. This underscores the broader trend away from traditional religious structures towards more individualized forms of meaning-making. The contemporary Czech esoteric scene thus reflects a complex negotiation between historical legacies and modern influences. The decline of traditional Christianity created a space filled not by uniform atheism, but by a diverse ecosystem of alternative beliefs. This includes the reconstruction of pre-Christian pagan paths, Slavic, Germanic, Celtic, the adoption and adaptation of international movements like Wicca, the continuation of Western occult traditions, and the proliferation of highly personalized spiritualities. It is a dynamic landscape where ancient folk traditions, the ghosts of Rudolphine alchemy, the legacy of 20th century Hermeticism, and globalized New Age and magical currents all converge. 8. Synthesis. The interplay of mainstream and esoteric currents. The relationship between esoteric traditions and mainstream Czech culture and history is not one of simple separation or antagonism, but rather a complex and dynamic interplay characterized by periods of mutual influence, appropriation, suppression, and persistent coexistence. Esoteric elements have repeatedly surfaced, submerged, and transformed in response to dominant political, religious, and social forces, acting as a revealing undercurrent throughout Czech history. Mainstream historical events have profoundly shaped the trajectory of Czech esotericism. The religious conflicts following the Hussite movement in the 15th century created a legacy of religious dissent and questioning of authority, potentially contributing to later openness towards alternative spiritual paths. The relative tolerance, or perhaps preoccupied indifference of Emperor Rudolf II allowed Prague to become an unprecedented haven for alchemists and occultists, directly fostering a golden age of esoteric activity. Conversely, the consolidation of Catholic power during the Baroque era led to a different expression of spirituality, though perhaps still containing esoteric layers within its symbolism and practices. The national revival, driven by mainstream goals of linguistic and cultural restoration, drew heavily on folklore and romanticism, preserving and valorizing elements myth, folk magic, intuition that resonated with esoteric worldviews. The political traumas of the 20th century, Nazi occupation and communist rule, led to the brutal suppression of esoteric groups, demonstrating that mainstream political power viewed these seemingly fringe movements as potentially subversive or ideologically incompatible. The subsequent liberalization after 1989 allowed these suppressed currents to resurface and interact with new global trends. Conversely, esoteric ideas and figures have left their mark on mainstream Czech culture. The legacy of Rudolf II court is undeniable, contributing not only to Prague's enduring mystical reputation, but also to tangible artistic and scientific achievements. The rich body of Czech folklore, laden with magical elements, became a foundational source for national literature during the revival and continues to inform cultural identity. The very image of Prague as a magical city is a powerful cultural trope exploited in literature, art, and tourism, shaping both internal self-perception and international image. Figures like Rabbi Low and the Golem, or the prophetess Libush, have transcended niche interests to become widely recognized symbols within Czech culture. The connection between esotericism and nationalism is a recurring theme, particularly evident in Central and Eastern Europe. The turn towards folklore and the sometimes fabricated ancient past tapped into desires for a unique, pre-Christian heritage that could bolster national identity against dominant German culture. In the contemporary era, some branches of paganism, particularly Slavic native faith movements, can sometimes exhibit ethno-nationalist tendencies, emphasizing ancestral roots and perceived indigenous traditions. However, it is crucial to note that esotericism also contains strong universalist currents, e.g., Theosophy's no religion higher than truth, or the transnational networks of figures like Meixner or Leisnik, and many modern pagan and esoteric groups actively oppose nationalism and racism. The relationship is therefore complex and context-dependent, with esoteric ideas being potentially mobilized for both particularist nationalist and universalist transnational aims. The contemporary Czech situation, marked by high levels of secularism coexisting with diverse spiritual seeking, presents another facet of this interplay. The decline of traditional religious institutions has not necessarily led to a purely materialist society. Instead, it seems to have opened up space for individualized spiritualities, revived paganisms, and modern occult practices to flourish, perhaps as alternative ways of finding meaning, community, or connection to heritage in a post-communist, globalized world. Esotericism, in this context, might function as a counter-narrative to both traditional religion and secular modernity, offering frameworks that embrace mystery, personal experience, and connection to nature or perceived ancient wisdom. The concept of magic Bohemia encapsulates this enduring fascination. It is partly rooted in genuine historical events, Rudolf II court, folk traditions, partly a romanticized construction amplified by literature and art, and partly a modern phenomenon shaped by tourism and contemporary spiritual movements like Varlo's Bohemian magic. This image functions as a powerful element of Czech cultural identity, highlighting a perceived uniqueness and depth beyond mainstream historical narratives. Ultimately, the esoteric dimension of Czech culture is not a static relic, but a living, evolving stream. It interacts constantly with the mainstream, sometimes influencing it, sometimes being suppressed by it, sometimes offering a critique or alternative. Its persistence suggests it addresses enduring human needs for meaning, connection to the past, understanding of the unseen, and perhaps a sense of national or personal destiny Assad that transcends purely political or rational explanations. To fully grasp the complexities of Czech history and identity, one must acknowledge this vital, often hidden, but consistently present esoteric undercurrent. 9. Conclusion. The unfolding tapestry, the exploration of esotericism within the Bohemian and Czech context reveals a rich, complex, and remarkably resilient tapestry woven through centuries of history. From the dimly perceived beliefs of pre-Christian Slavs and the enduring power of folk magic rituals tied to the land and seasons, the narrative unfolds through distinct and transformative periods. The reign of Emperor Rudolf Roman II stands as a singular moment, establishing Prague as an international crucible where alchemy, astrology, and Kabbalah intersected with nascent scientific inquiry and artistic brilliance, indelibly marking the city's identity. Subsequent eras saw these esoteric currents adapt and persist beneath shifting dominant ideologies. The Catholic Baroque, while emphasizing its own doctrines, provided a fertile ground for mysticism, symbolism, and the veneration of saints and legends, potentially incorporating or overlaying older beliefs. The National Revival, in its quest for authentic Czech identity, turned to folklore and romanticism, preserving magical narratives and fostering an intellectual climate receptive to the past's mystique, even as it paved the way for modern esoteric movements like Theosophy and Martinism to take root at the turn of the 20th century. The 20th century subjected these traditions to extreme pressures, witnessing a vibrant golden age of organized Hermeticism during the First Republic, followed by systematic suppression and persecution under both Nazi and communist totalitarian regimes. Yet, this suppression failed to extinguish the underlying interest, which resurfaced with vigor after the Velvet Revolution in 1989. The contemporary Czech Republic presents a fascinating paradox, a society often described as among the most secular in Europe, yet simultaneously hosting a diverse and active scene of modern paganism including Slavic, Germanic, and Celtic paths, various forms of modern magic and occultism, and a significant population embracing personalized, non-institutional spirituality. This landscape is further enriched by a dense network of myths and legends anchored in specific locations. From the Golem of Prague and the prophecies of Libush to the ghostly White Lady and the magical associations of castles, bridges, and hidden corners of the city, several enduring themes emerge from this historical trajectory. The concept of Assad, fate or destiny, resonates through Czech culture, perhaps reflecting a collective grappling with a history often shaped by external forces. There is a continuous interplay between esoteric traditions and notions of national identity, with ancient wisdom and folk heritage sometimes invoked to bolster cultural uniqueness. The cycle of suppression and resilience highlights the perceived challenge that alternative spiritualities can pose to monolithic power structures, as well as the deep-seated nature of these interests within the populace. Finally, the persistent image of magic Bohemia, particularly centered on Prague, demonstrates the enduring power of historical narrative myth and esoteric symbolism to shape cultural perception both internally and externally. The story of esotericism in the Czech lands is not a closed chapter, but an ongoing process. It is a testament to the multifaceted ways humans seek meaning, connection, and understanding beyond the purely rational or material. In the Czech Republic, ancient echoes, historical legacies, folk traditions, and contemporary global currents continue to intertwine, weaving a unique and ever-unfolding cultural tapestry where the mystical and the mundane coexist, often in surprising and illuminating ways. The exploration of Assad and Bohemian magic reveals not just a history of curious beliefs, but a deeper insight into the enduring complexities of the Czech soul.